This is the Sports Sit Down with Mike Damergis.
Well, I have the honor of talking to one of my childhood heroes, Mr. Chuck Foreman of the Minnesota Vikings back in the 1970s. They called you the spin doctor because nobody moved on the field like you back then.
Well, that's what they say. There's a lot of guys moving around. I just did it a little different.
Well, 1973, the NFL AP Offensive Rookie of the Year, 73 Sporting News Rookie of the Year, 74 Sporting News Player of the Year, and 1976 UPI MVP. They had you as you were dynamite there with those Vikings teams, and the Vikings had a great defense. But when you came on the scene in 1973, I mean, you're talking the Vikings put up big numbers: 12-2, 10-4, 12-2. 12-2, 11-2. Some dynamite teams you had through a 4 or 5 year span there with the Vikings.
Certainly did. Had a lot of great people here. They were pretty much they were solid before I got here. With the Purple People Eaters, and they had Fran Tarkenton, and then when I came, they created an offense that suited my talents, and we got to do some great things.
I think the 1970s was kind of the rise of the modern day running back, would you say, out of the 60s into the 70s, very athletic.
Yeah.
Yourself, Simpson, then later on Tony Dorsett, and of course, let's not forget Walter Payton.
Oh, no question. Walter was one of the greatest ever played. But yeah, I think it kind of evolved into a different type and different style because when I first got here, of course, in '73, there was a style of offense that they used. It was definitely run dominant. But they got more athletic guys in the backfield. I mean, obviously there was some, when I was a kid, there was Lenny Moore, there was a couple of Mitchell, and I mean, you can go on down the line for it, but really the dominant ones were the most physical backs.
Well, let's talk about that team. The Vikings team went to 3 Super Bowls during your period there. Let's talk about the first one. There was a confidence going into that first one against Miami, them despite having Larry Zonka on the team and a great defense coming out
Well,
just shy of that immaculate team that went 17-0.
yeah, I got to watch those guys when I was in college down in Miami, so I knew how well coached they were, and just a bunch of great. It was a great team, no question about it. And I think of all the Super Bowls we played in, I think that particular team was the one that may have been a little better than we were. They were pretty much they were a very dominant team for several years.
And then the following season, you went on to take on the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that was a tight defensive game for a while, and then Pittsburgh finally took over as well. It seemed like the Viking teams weren't able to get the ground game going the way they wanted to against the Steelers and the
I
Raiders later on in Miami.
I think with our team, for some reason, some odd reason, when we got to the Super Bowl, they changed up our offense and go away from the things that we did to get us there. And it was very uncomfortable for the most part. I'm not saying that other teams didn't play well, but you know, I think if we would have stayed with what we did to get there. I mean, we were here. We can't do this because Joe Green's in the middle, and we're gonna do this. We had some crazy offense we called the jam in there, whereas I would have went one way, Marinero would have went one way, but Joe Green just said, "No, I'm gonna stop all that." He just stopped everything right up the middle. So that didn't work, and then you tried to get back into the things you were really good at, and it was you know another sad, difficult loss. But I always thought that we were a much better team than Pittsburgh Steelers.
How hard was it? I mean, you lose the first one to Miami, then you go back the next year, so there wasn't that lag, the Super Bowl lag. When you lost the second time, did it start to get in your head a little bit that we can't win the big one, Chuck?
I don't know if it got into our head. There was certainly a lot of question marks about, what can we do? And I know in that off season I worked that much harder to try to get better at everything I could do. I know that much. So it really did give me some incentive to be a better player. But and then the best team we had lost on a fluke play against the Dallas Cowboys. And that was our best team.
Yeah, I've heard Fran Tarkington talk about that. That was my next thing, and we're talking with a great Chuck Foreman, running back with the Minnesota Vikings, led the league in touchdowns in 1974 and 1976. My first memory of a football game that I could remember where it affected me emotionally, I remember that Dallas game, that playoff game, and you guys were ahead, and that Hail Mary. It was a little warm for Minnesota at the time, so the weather didn't affect the Cowboys as much. But I would assume you guys thought you guys had this thing in the bag there with Dallas, right?
Oh, I certainly thought we were going to win the game. No question. I mean, you never have a 100%, feel until it's over. But that particular play and the way it happened, and it was just right out in the open where the guy pushed Nate down, and they didn't make the call. It was more shocked than anything that the call wasn't made, and we lost that game. Our best team that we had when I was up here, and we lost to Dallas on a play like that. That was really heartbreaking.
What was it like in the locker room after losing a game like that at home, and the fans left there stunned, and
Well,
a nation stunned because football was really emerging in the television market
so
by then. So the whole nation watched that game.
well, then that's when Dallas became so-called America's team after that game. You remember that? And it was difficult again you know to stomach, but it was what it was, and we had to go back, regroup, and come back the next year, and we got back again, and it's just just
N-
things work out. I think a lot of times, I know for us anyway, we'd get out of town, and um, I thought everybody else, we were locked up pretty much, and everybody else was out, enjoying the cities and doing the things like they would normally do. And we were locked away from family and everything else. So it was a little different, the way we handled the Super Bowl. So
Yeah, in 75, going back to that team, probably the best team. Fran Tarkenton said it's the best team. Now, his father passed away after that game. Is that correct? That happened to Fran
so
after watching that game?
certainly did. And yeah, there's a lot of memories in that game that weren't good, and that was one of them. And losing the game, well, no, that wasn't as bad as Fran losing his dad on that day, but it was a sad day.
Somehow two Super Bowl losses and then losing a heartbreaker to Dallas. A lot of teams would have crumbled, and that would have been it. Going into 76, what was how did Bud Grant motivate everybody to give it? And probably the last shot and the last time the Vikings were in a Super Bowl. What was it like
Well,
going to training camp that year with Minnesota under
you
Bud
know,
Grant?
well, again, we had a lot of incentive because we knew that team was really great, and we had everybody coming back. And we worked hard again to get back to the Super Bowl, and we got back to the Super Bowl. And again, same thing.
You guys had the block early on with against the Raiders there, and you had the ball at the 2 yard line, and you couldn't punch it in. I talked to Sammy White actually the other day. Do you think if you would have scored, got some points there on that drive there, things might have been different, or did Oakland? You thought Oakland was maybe just too good?
Well, okay, let me explain to you this way.
Okay.
Strong right, 22 lead. That meant I was blocking. That meant Chuck Foreman was blocking on the 1 yard line with 1 yard to go. I could have just jumped over. So when you were doing too much thinking or trying to outthink somebody instead of doing what you did best, another mistake. So when that play was called, I was like, I just was lost for words. So
With it,
that's how.
hmm. Yeah, I don't mean to cut you off. This is fascinating for me to hear, talking about this. Were there conversations with Bud, or just Bud gave the orders kind of thing? It wasn't a conversation really, or how did it go on the
wasn't a
sidelines?
conversation. It wasn't a conversation with me. Obviously, I just thought automatically on the 1 yard line. I was going over the top. 40-inch vertical leap. Why wouldn't I? And so, but when he called, when that came strong right 22 lead, and I'm blocking. and then the ball was fumbled, and that was all she wrote.
Do you get a lot of people, a lot of questions all these years later, people talking about those teams in that game? It's like those 4 years have a really incredible team, incredible heartbreak. But those 4 years, 40 years later, people still talk about that and they hold on to it so dearly and tightly, and they love those Viking teams.
They certainly did, and it still bothers me when I talk about it. The fact that we had all these great teams that I was a part of, and we couldn't win a Super Bowl when I knew our team was really, really good. And just some of the things that we did that prepping and changing. I'm a firm believer in you got to go to the dance what got you there. And we went to the dance all right, but we changed up too much when we got there. And that's my opinion. I just thought sometimes even overthink things. And I think that was one of our faults.
Talk about the rivalry in the NFC. It was the Vikings. It was the Cowboys. Those are the big two teams, and the Rams. Those seem like those are the three teams that really dominated that period in the '70s in the
Yeah.
NFC.
And
How would you when you saw Roger Staubach or Jack Youngblood on the Rams play, and break down the fearsome foursome and stuff like that? Talk about your opponents there. Who's the best? Who do you admire the most?
well,
Best defensive players and such like that.
right. Well, you knew, back in those days, you can pretty much go through the schedule and say you can take a check mark and pick out the teams that you were going to beat. But you knew in the end there was going to be Dallas, there was going to be the Vikings, there was going to be, LA, and you know, for sure going to be right there in the hunt at the end. And those are generally the teams that were in in the NFC Championship game. And it was going to be a tough game because all the teams were physical at that time, and quarterbacks were really good, and it was just who was on the game at the right time. We just didn't seem to get going, or we made mistakes that we didn't make, or you can sit down and think about it, but wasn't that the guys didn't want to make it happen, but I don't know, it just wasn't happening.
I talked to Chuck Mercine a few years ago, and he talked about how he was benched in the Super Bowl. That Coach Lombardi benched him. I says, does this stuff bother you? Do you lay at night in your bed, 12 o'clock at night, with your head on your forehead, thinking of this stuff? Does this stuff still stay with you, or you think about it in your quiet moments, having a beer or having a cigar on your deck or something like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it doesn't consume me, but I just we're not fortunately, but unfortunately, people see me all the time and they bring that up all the time. And hey, how'd you lose Super Bowl this? How'd you lose Super Bowl this one? It's almost like an everyday thing when I get out in public and I'm doing things in the public for the Vikings or some other stuff I'm doing around. It's there all the time. What happened? Why didn't you do this? And why didn't you do that? My only answer is I don't have an answer. I just know we had the talent. But when you sit down, you break it down, and see how many teams have been to the Super Bowl and how many people have won. It ain't an easy job getting there. You got to have everything in play to play in the Super Bowl. Well, I happen to play in three. The Vikings played in four. And when you get teams that win 6 Super Bowl titles, 3 Super Bowl titles, they were, they were pretty dialed in. They had something that was working right. So,
Who,
they get credit.
who was the best defense you went against, and the best defensive player you went against during your time?
Well, I'll put it this way. Like I said, LA was always tough. And Dallas was tough. Well, a lot of tough teams defensively, no question about it. Even in the black and blue, and in the Central, you would go against Chicago and and the Green Bay. They were always physical. But I can tell you that the guy that I went up against one on one, there was two. There was Thomas Henderson, but I could beat him because he always talked. So he was talk too much. But then there was Jack Ham with Pittsburgh, and he was just like I mean, I could beat him, but he was just like a gnat. When you just swatting them, they just always around. No matter what you do, they're around. And he was like to me the most, the guy that I think about all the time when I'm in that part of my game, the passing, the receiving part of it, and even the run part, he was always there. I mean, just there, and like you look at the film and he's always around, man. So he's one of the players that I guess I respect a lot because he never made mistakes and he was always where he needed to be. And made you work for sure.
How about quarterbacks of that era? Some great quarterbacks of that era early on, and then later on, Montana
Right.
came around, Staubach, and talk about the quarterbacks of that generation. You played with one, of course. Franz Harkington was the all-time leading
Yeah,
passer when he retired. People forget about that.
there's a lot of players, quarterbacks, Roger Staubach. Oh, when I got into the league, of course, Fran was there, but Roman Gabriel was there when I first got there. Jim Hart was there. I mean, you could go on down the line and think about uh, all the quarter had a lot of quarterbacks, and those quarterbacks were different because they didn't have anything in their ear. Somebody calling the plays for them. They, when it came to the game plan, they memorized that game plan and they knew what to do. If they needed a change, you had to call the timeout and go to the sideline. But generally, those guys that get up there, they get up there to see what's out there. Then you had to have total recall when they changed the plays in the huddle. Wasn't anybody in your ear telling you, "Hey, this is what we see up here. Make this call." Now, those guys were different. They were definitely dialed into everything they were doing.
When you see the game today, over the years, it's gone way more passing game and less of a running game, and you don't see number one picks coming out of running back anymore. How do you view the game from your perspective today? And I think you played in the golden era of football in the 1970s, all those great teams, uh,
Well,
and how do you look at the game today?
I guess the rule changes are good. But I don't. When I evaluate a player, I don't really evaluate his stats in today's game because in my time, it's like you're a wide receiver. You had to bump and run, and they bump you all the way downfield, beat you up anyway. You couldn't tell the ball was thrown, so you weren't. You had to get off the line of scrimmage before you can get to your route. Um, as far as blocking goes, today they hold every play, and in those days, you get your hands out, it was a penalty. Uh, there's a lot of the injury wise, guys played when they were a lot of them played when they were injured, not just hurt. That limited their longevity. And then like I said, the big change in the game is the rules, and so when I hear the word "goat," I'm like, look, I'm not down with the word "goat." I mean, you could be the best of your time, and I take those eras like every 10 years. You can be the best in your time, but you ain't gonna tell me you the GOAT. Because when I look back and I see some of the like players that played maybe before me and during me, and when those defensive linemen could get to the quarterback and inflict some pain, they don't have that in the last 15 years or however. And so the quarterback stats are greater. They can play long. You can pick. They play until they're 45 years old now. That wasn't happening back in my time. And then before, and I was telling the guy the other day that one of the pictures that I've always remembered, I think it was on the cover of Sports Illustrated or in Sports Illustrated, was a quarterback by the name of Y.A. Tittle.
The picture of him on his knees with the blood coming from his head.
Oh yeah, you see that? But that's what used to happen to quarterbacks when we played. They get beat up. And so there was a lot of things that happened during the course of a game and during the game at my time and in the time before me, and even maybe a little bit after, they let the guys play some defense, and when they got to the quarterback, you know, they got to him, and they, you know, tried to put him out of the game. Running back, same way. You better be your head better be on a swivel. You better know where you're going and what's coming. You better know all those things, and so it's a different game. It's a safer game. I like that part of it, but in my time, that was the golden era of football.
It certainly was. Health wise, we've seen a lot of changes health wise. How are you doing, and some of your teammates doing? Do you like what the NFL has done as far as the improvements they've made, or you just think it's come 30 years too late?
Well, it's still not enough, no question about it. There's a lot of guys that are having difficulty for sure, and I don't think with the money that's been made in the game and the guys that set the foundation for the league and the sacrifices they made to get the league up and running the way it is today. And then some of the things I hear players after me say, about the former players. Oh, they should have invested their money, or they should have done it. Wait, hey man, there wasn't no money to invest. You invested your physical being. That's all you invested in, hoping that you did something. You got your degree when you were in college, or you had a good job waiting on you. Everybody wasn't going into TV, or anything like that, And if you did make some money, you had enough money to save, but you still had to go figure out what you were going to do after the game. But I think, and then the physical part of it and the mental part of it and all the injuries you have uh, as a result of this game. And then, we hear complaints about all, it is what it is. There's guys out there don't even know who they are, or, the CTE thing, and, yeah, just it's too much money out there that they've made, and because of the guys before them, not to support the guys that they have, at least to make sure the health coverage is there, and their monthly, you know, retirement is something they can live on. I think, of all the sports, you know, I think baseball's the top. I will say one thing about their players: when they had their union was strong. Hockey, basketball, football, we were weak, and this is the result. You know, it should be much more. And then I don't know. It's just, to me, I appreciate everything that I have, but certainly they could have done much better.
Well, Chuck, I mean, your generation left body parts on the field. Let's be honest here. You left blood on the
Yeah,
field.
no
So,
doubt.
so, and I want to thank you for that. I mean, I could look at the highlights and look how glorious it was. I wasn't the one getting hit. I wasn't the running back getting hit by three Pittsburgh Steelers. So I just wanted, from a football fan, I just want to thank you for what you
Well,
did.
I, I
Um,
I really appreciate that. But the one thing I really did want to say is, like, you know, I'm not saying all of the current players or players after us. Boy, you better appreciate the sacrifices made so you could be where you are right now. And if you can't do that, then you're not much of a man.
Is there anything that could be done more for the retired players like yourself? Is there ongoing talks to help? Listen, the cost of living is ridiculous, Chuck. I mean, it costs $10,000 a month if you want to put food on your table. It's insane, and I would imagine the NFL alumni haven't been keeping up with that.
Well, the current player. Okay, here's the thing. The union. We had a union. We voted like Gene Upshaw in to run the union for us, and then all of a sudden they make a deal and they split the union, the current players and former players. And then when you would call the union office and talk to the guy that you elected to represent you in that union, and he tells me or tells you or whomever else, "Oh, I don't represent you anymore. I represent the current player." And the former players are out having to fight to and scratch to get anything. That's the part of the whole thing that just really soured me on that particular group of representatives. It was to me a cold-blooded thing to do.
Well, Chuck, we hope you. I'm glad to see you're intact. You seem to have
Yeah.
all. You seem to be sharp as a knife, and I'm glad to see that. And as behalf of a fan in the '70s, I want to thank you and thank you for all the blood and
Well,
guts you spilled on the football field. And
uh,
I'm glad to see at least former players, could make some money with signings, and fans still love you guys. Is there a story or something that's not out there? We talked about the stuff that most fans know about. Is there a story about Chuck Foreman or playing with the Vikings that you'd like to share that people don't know much about?
well, I don't know. I think it is what it is. I think I'm very fortunate to have played for the Viking in the organization at the time. Um, you know, but I guess the good thing about being up here is, they do hold the franchise in high regard, former players in high regard, and the opportunities, you know, to do things like you say, the memorabilia stuff, and of course now, you had to get to know the social media thing, and I guess if you're into that, you could probably do some things. But me, I got to tell you, I'm very blessed to be in a good place. I probably don't have to worry about things like maybe some other people do, but you know, I can't complain one bit about where I'm at. I got great family, kids, people around me. I'm in a darn good place. And
Um, I'm glad to
yeah.
see that and glad to hear that. And I got one more question for you, Bill. I'm like Columbo here. I got one more question. Did you and Butkus pass over cross? And did Butkus ever hit you?
Oh yeah. I did take here's the story I'll tell you. Okay, so in my rookie year, of course, Dick Buckus, but at that time, he had a bad knee, and of course, when you had a knee back in those days, the surgeries were totally different. But I think he had one or two surgeries. But I watched film of him, and he was still filling that hole up the middle. He was still as physical as he could be, as nasty as he could be. And I don't know what the heck I was thinking about. So we were playing in Chicago, and I'm sitting in the huddle, and Fran calls the plays for me. Okay, so I get the ball, and for some stupid reason, I'm thinking, I wonder how it feels to get hit by Dick Buckus. So I jumped I went right at him. I wasn't even thinking about moving or getting rid of him. I want to see how this feels. A big mistake. It hurt quite a bit. He was, for a word that we used to, he was a hard dude, and I'd never do that again. And I would never try that again. But he was everything they said he was, just like a.
Well, thank you for that story and thank you for the time. And if you ever need any help with anything, just let me know and I'll help try and spread the word for you, whatever I can do for you. And
I appreciate that, very much. And so, I will say this, like people ask me about this Hall of Fame thing. I ain't losing no sleep. That's all I can say about that.
well,
So,
you're one of the greats of the 1970s, that's for sure. I mean, you can't talk about the 70s without talking about the Minnesota Vikings and Chuck Foreman. That you were poetic in your running and graceful and unique at the time, because I could still see the images of you just doing a twirl and defenders missing you and everything like that. And what a great receiver out of the back you were too.
I appreciate all that. And, really, like I said, very much appreciate it. I thank you.